Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to another episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Tuesday, November 26th, and today, Grayson and I give you our final regular season game preview of the 2024 season for Baylor football. It's crazy. It's kind of flown by with multiple storylines throughout the season, but this week, the Bears will welcome in red-hot Kansas. The Jayhawks have won 3 straight games over ranked opponents. 4 out of their last 5 games they have won, and they're now 5-6 overall and looking to earn bowl eligibility after a disappointing 2-6 start to the season. Meanwhile, Baylor is pretty hot as well. They've won 5 straight, now 7-4 on the season, and it hasn't been as impressive of a stretch for Baylor, but it has been impressive. You're talking about 3 wins over now bowl teams, 2 teams, TCU, Texas Tech, who have 7 wins, and they have won 4 of those 5 games by at least 10 points, all by double-digit scores, excluding the 3-point win over TCU. So, Grayson, these 2 teams have combined 9-1 in their last 10 games, and to me, playing like 2 of the best teams in the Big 12. Obviously, the early season struggles for both of these teams, Kansas and Baylor, have prevented them from really having a solid chance at the Big 12 championship. But there's no denying, especially the way Kansas has played, that they're one of the best teams in the league right now. I mean, they knocked off 3 contenders. They lost to Arizona State by less than a score earlier in the year. And it's going to be a really fun game on Saturday. And if you're a Big 12 fan, have any interest in other games, this is one you're absolutely going to want to watch.
It really is. And I mean, the more that you look into Kansas's schedule, the more that you go, man, you didn't picture this at the beginning of the year necessarily, but now where we're at, it's like, wow, they really might have had the toughest schedule of any Big 12 team. I mean, you look at Illinois is currently ranked. I think UNLV is ranked as well. And then you look through and go, oh, almost every team they've played in conference play is a bowl team already. Aside from Houston, there's only 2 teams on this schedule that aren't bowl teams, and that's Lindenwood and Houston. I mean, they just have had a gauntlet, and, for them, it's been kind of interesting because their whole schedule has been difficult, but things really turned around when they started playing the top quarter of the Big 12. I mean, they played Arizona State, narrowly lost. I would say that since that game, I think that's pretty much who they are. They barely lost to Arizona State in a really good game. They crushed Houston, really played well against K-State, felt like they probably should have won that game. And then 3 wins in a row against Iowa State, at BYU, and Colorado. It was really once they started playing the top of the league, that's when they started performing better. And so that's been a very interesting thing to watch. I think in general, going into this matchup, you kind of know what you're getting from Kansas. They have a really good offense. I think their offense is a top 25 offense. I think their defense leaves a lot to be desired. And so for that reason, I do think they're very similar to Baylor in a lot of ways. They give up yardage. They give up points on defense, on offense. They feel like they can score on anyone. And as long as they don't have self-inflicted wounds, they feel like they're going to be able to score a lot of points and win a lot of football games. And early in the year, that's where they struggled, right? They had 11 turnovers in their first 5 games, and they started 1-4. Since then, they've been playing really clean football, which has allowed them to get to the point where they're at now.
Yeah, and, you look at their makeup, and they're, I would say, opportunistic on defense, but struggle in general. And obviously, you mentioned the offense being really good, and that leads you to a team who's fighting for bowl eligibility. And I think that makes sense. I think that you look at what they do up until their game against Colorado. For 11 games, they have struggled defensively, and that's what puts them in the position that they're in. I know they struggle turning the ball over, but at times they just struggle to stop the opposition. And I think they're truly probably more like an 8-4. You look at all the 1 possession games they have. they're not a 5-6 team. I mean, they play above that or have been playing above that really all season. They just lost close games. You mentioned Illinois being ranked. I don't know if Illinois should be ranked, but they are. They are where they are, and it's starting that early in the season. They just played really tough tests throughout. And you mentioned being similar to Baylor and lining up. These right now are the two most explosive offenses in the Big 12. And that's what the numbers say in Big 12 play only. It's number 1 versus number 2. And then you have two defenses that give up a lot of explosive plays. And that's where you get I don't know what the over and under was officially in this game, but it's high. And I think that you're probably going to want to take over depending on pace of play in this game. And it starts with, when I talk about pace of play, it starts with the run game because Kansas, and obviously we know Baylor wants to run the football, and you start Devin Neal. And that's arguably, in my opinion, their best offensive player. He has been for a couple of years. Jalen Daniels is really good at quarterback, but Devin Neal is what makes that offense go consistently. And truly, even through this winning streak, Jalen Daniels hasn't been what everybody hoped he would be as a passer. He still struggles in that area. Obviously, he's extremely athletic, but when they're playing their best, Devin Neal is crushing it. And look at their game against Colorado, 37 rush attempts. He had 4 receptions in this game, so 41 touches for nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's incredible. Now, are they overdoing it a little bit in that one game? I don't know. I know that they had some Daniel Highshaw is out. Sounds like he's not going to be back. Their backup running back, so it looks like he took on a little bit more load. But to me, it starts with their running game, and Jalen Daniels' legs have a lot to do with that. But Devin Neal is the X factor for their offense.
Right. He is their best player. He's a really, really good running back. And, at times that can make the difference for them. And against Colorado, it absolutely did. He was very special in that football game. And he was the best player on the field. And that's why they won that game. And so I think that's one of those things that you look at and go, okay, well, that could be a problem, especially because Baylor has had some games where they've struggled stopping the run. And, it's been, I would say, the strength of their defense if you're looking at run defense versus pass defense, but it still hasn't been, really good. It's been pretty mediocre. And so now you're facing a team that can really run the football, and they will try to run the football at you, try to keep the football for as long as they can. And that really sets up everything in their offense. And the thing of it is, this offense isn't going to surprise Baylor fans. I mean, Jeff Grimes is their offense coordinator, so you know exactly what they're trying to do. They're going to try to run the football, establish line of scrimmage, win up front, and then they're going to try to hit you over the top with play action type plays and big chunk plays. And that's why they've been so explosive, because they create them in the run game and then they create them in the pass game. And that's where they're really going to try to attack Baylor in this matchup. Dave Aranda said in his press conference that, Jeff Grimes is probably going to watch that Iowa State game, and that's what they're going to try to emulate, because that was Baylor's worst defensive performance of the year. So they're probably going to try to put Baylor in similar situations, force them to make similar type plays. And Aranda said that tackling is the area that they just have not been good enough at. And the crazy part is tackling really isn't one of those things that you just all of a sudden get better at. It usually takes an off season. So going into this game, they're just going to have to try to limit the missed tackles, even against these explosive playmakers, specifically Devin Neal and Jalen Daniels when he's run the football.
Yeah. So a couple notes here specifically about their Kansas offense. It sounds like starting right tackle Logan Brown is going to be out. Lance Leipold called him doubtful for this game. He got hurt late against Colorado. And not only is that a big deal for the right tackle position, but it had a kind of a domino effect, at least in the Colorado game. Starting left tackle Bryce Calebdu, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, flipped over to the right tackle position, and redshirt freshman Calvin Clement, who, if you follow Baylor recruiting, he was a Baylor commit at one time, came in and played at left tackle. So if he's out, that could have an impact. At the end of that Colorado game, probably not as much, because you're in the flow of the game. And truthfully, I don't think they were going to really stop Kansas at that point of the game anyways. But now that Baylor has the opportunity to game plan for it, maybe it's something to watch. I still think that they're going to run the ball successfully, or have the ability to run it successfully, if Baylor just didn't play out of their minds. And then I mentioned it earlier, Daniel Highshaw, their backup running back, did not play against Colorado, but Lance Leipold mentioned that he is out for a little while. He didn't clarify. I mean, I assume he's not coming back for this game based on the way he phrased it. That was their backup running back. And, I know that Devin Neal gets a lot of carries, but he had 41 touches against Colorado with Daniel not there. So where's their headspace out? Savion Morrison is their backup running back right now, but he doesn't have nearly the experience. He set a career high of carries in that game against Colorado with 11. So he doesn't have a ton of experience, and it could impact it. Specifically because it's you're impacting the run game on both levels at the offensive line and then as the backup running back position. So and then for Baylor's sake, Steve Linton out that outside linebacker position, it sounds like he's going to be back for this game based on what Dave Aranda said, which is a huge piece. You want to be athletic in that front. And they didn't necessarily miss him against Houston, but he could have been valuable in that game because of his ability to chase guys down in the open field, and might have helped in the tackling department because he's been one of their better tacklers out of that position as well. So, I'm really defensively. I think that you just say, hey, if Baylor can get enough stops in this game because of the matchup with Baylor's offense, and Kansas is saying the same thing, just like get enough. And that's one thing that Kansas does defensively. They get turnovers. They have 11 interceptions in Big 12 play. That's number 2 in the Big 12. And I think that's what Baylor just got through struggling with. Sawyer Robertson throws 3 against Houston. And that's kind of where I'm looking. I'm not calling it. I mean, it's a key to the game. Turnovers, preventing them and getting them are always a key to the game. But for this game specifically, Kansas is very opportunistic defensively. And Baylor cannot have that type of performance again this weekend against Kansas.
Right. Yeah, they've been very opportunistic all year long. Even when their offense was turning it over, they were still showing the ability to force turnovers themselves. And they've been doing that pretty much all season. So that's definitely been an area to keep an eye on. And, they got really good cornerbacks. They just have good players, right, that can make plays on the football. Dave Aranda mentioned that. And that's something to watch because you're exactly right. Sawyer Robertson was not taking care of the football against Houston. And now you get to come back home. I do think there is something to that. There's a little bit of a different environment there. And it's a little bit harder, for a defense to win on the road as well. So I'm anticipating Sawyer Robertson being able to rebound from that performance against Houston. I think it's an outlier when you look at the body of work that he's put together this season. I will say, one of the interesting things that you mentioned, them missing a couple guys on the offensive line. So far this year, Kansas has one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12. Specifically, the 2 main stats that I like looking at are sacks and then, of course, your rushing yards. And they're in the top 2 in the Big 12 in both of those areas. They do not allow sacks. Part of that is that Jalen Daniels is very athletic. He doesn't allow that many sacks, but they've also been protecting him at a very high level. And then they've been able to run the football, which obviously holds back defensive linemen from being able to create pressure, also puts you in more advantageous positions on third down where you can't blitz as many guys. So all of that has really fed into this great offensive environment that they've put together. So I'm curious if these changes impact anything, because as we know, Baylor's, I think, 4th in the Big 12 in sacks. So they want to get after the quarterback. They want to find ways to create havoc, and they want to find ways to put Kansas in situations where, it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 plus, where they have to throw the football, and maybe Baylor can create some pressure in that way. And that's where obviously Steve Linton comes in. That's going to be an interesting thing to monitor. And I just want to point out, we are talking about a very good offensive line, a very good offensive team. It's really hard to find holes in kind of what they do. But I will say this, you're right that they forced a lot of turnovers, but Jalen Daniels has also turned the ball over a ton. Now, it's gotten a lot better during this stretch, but there's also this part of his game where he has done that often. And at the beginning of the year, he was doing it a lot. And so if Baylor can put him in bad situations, which teams have really not been able to do over this second half of the year, then I do think there will be some opportunities to potentially force some turnovers and create some momentum, especially at home.
Yeah, if you look at Jalen's basically statistics throughout the season, his passing attempts have dropped, and obviously in the last 2 games, but they really tried to get him out. And sorry, not his attempts, but his yardage. The last 2 games against BYU, 169 and 189. He's not being asked to do as much through the air, and a lot of that, to me, goes back to those turnovers early in the season. He had a stretch where he had 3, 2, 1, or start off with 1 interception, then 3, 2, 1, 1. and that's in the first 5 games of the season. And since those first 5 games, he's only thrown 2 interceptions. And I think that correlates to them for getting familiar with Jeff Grimes and what he wants to do, and Jeff Grimes getting used to that personnel. But I think they're just trying to make sure they don't turn the ball over, because they're gonna operate efficiently when they're not when they're not turning it over. You mentioned that was truly what led to their bad start, was turning the football over, losing 1 possession games because of it. Jalen Daniels for the season has thrown for 2,100 yards, basically 57% completions, 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. And then he's rushed 88 times for 410 yards with 6 touchdowns. The last 5 games, though, 50 carries for 279 yards and 3 touchdowns. So basically over 50% in all those categories in the last 5 games. Now, that's relatively speaking, because that's almost 50% of the season. So it's not anomaly. But if you look through the trends, he had 3 consecutive games of 15, 12, and 10 carries. And he hadn't done that basically the entire season until this stretch. So they're using his legs more, as becoming more creative. And I think it's going to come down to my keys in this game. But Baylor being able to force him into being a passer is important in this game, because you don't want him to just scramble around, not get pressure on him. I watched the Iowa State game earlier, and he just kind of did whatever he wanted. He just moved around in the pocket, was able to make throws. Iowa State couldn't stop the run, and they were giving him so much time to throw the football. And that's what resulted in 45 points in that game for them. Baylor can't afford to do that defensively. Just let him sit back there clean. He might get some runs off of it, but he can still have the ability to pick you apart if you don't pressure him, and obviously contain him at the same time, because there's not very many quarterbacks, if any, that are more athletic than him. I think Garrett Green, in terms of who Baylor has faced, is the most comparable, and we saw what Garrett did against Baylor in West Virginia.
Definitely, that's a big problem, and I think that it's important to remember that I would assume that Kansas really wanted to try to keep him healthy this year, because he has not been healthy his entire career, really. And so I think that makes a lot of sense, that right towards the end of the year, now you're opening up the run game even more with him, as you're trying to make this run to making a bowl game and being the best team that you can possibly be at the end of the year. And I think that is by running him, because it allows them to be so creative. It allows them to be really difficult to stop, because it's like you're having to account for another guy. It's not just handing the ball off. Like, he will absolutely keep it, but then also in the pass game, if you're not spying him, and if you're playing man-to-man defense, you're going to have problems. He's going to be able to step up and make some plays with his feet. That makes him very dangerous. You mentioned the Iowa State game. That game in totality was just an absolute mauling. I mean, they destroyed Iowa State. They put up 532 yards on Iowa State. I think, it's very clear that the Cyclones are not the team they were early in the year, like, especially on defense. They're just giving up a lot of yards, and Kansas took advantage of that, and really they had their best performance of the year in that game. And so that's one of those games that you can kind of look at and go, oh, was that kind of fluky or what? It might be, but then on the flip side, you look at what they did against Kansas State, you look at what they did against Colorado. Like, they have the ability to be explosive. They have the ability to do a lot of different things. They have the ability to be versatile, do it in the run game, do it in the pass game. And that's what makes them difficult to solve, I think, for anyone. And that's why going into this game, it's like, what's Baylor going to choose to take away? And I think for the most part, it's going to be trying to take away the run game. It's going to be trying to slow that down the best they can, and force Jalen Daniels to beat you. And then you kind of have to live with the results from that. And I think that's what they're going to try to do. It's tough. They haven't faced a team. Like, we've mentioned all the teams that they've played. We've mentioned that, some of these teams can throw it all over the place like TCU could. We mentioned West Virginia. They kind of had this ability to run the football and throw it to a certain extent. But this offense can really do both at a very high level. They have veteran receivers kind of all over the place. Like, literally, you look at their receiving core, and it feels like you've been saying these specific names for the last 3 or 4 years. When you look at Quentin Skinner, Lawrence Arnold, just a bunch of Devin Neal. We've mentioned his name a ton. Luke Grimm.
One of them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are names that we've just been talking about for years now, and they're still there, and Jalen Daniels is still there, and it makes them very cohesive and again very dangerous, because if they get clicking, they're so hard to stop. They know all of each other's tendencies. They kind of feed off of that and know what each other are capable of. And I think that's what makes them so dangerous. And honestly, what has allowed them to kind of crawl out of the hole that they dug themselves, because they do have all these veteran leaders on their team.
Yeah. And I mean, they've preseason, this was a team that you expected to be in the upper echelon of the Big 12. And they're playing to that right now offensively. And I think that you mentioned it, you hit on it just then. They were not going to let this team go down without a fight in general. They have, I think I counted 22 seniors, or maybe it might have been like 27 seniors on their depth chart, on their 2D offense and defense. If you're talking about 44 players across the board, 27 of those were seniors. It's absolutely nuts. So you knew they were going to battle. And we talked about it multiple times, like, where is Kansas going to be when this game is played? You don't think they're going to win those games, but they did. And now they're in a position to get to a bowl game. And they're going to put it out all on the line. This is not a team that just rallied off a few wins that doesn't really have a backbone to it. I think that this actually has a backbone to it offensively. Now, we can talk about defense, and I want to get to this side, because defensively, they're very opportunistic, but they struggle in a lot of ways. I mean, the Colorado game was a prime example of that. And I want to give their offense credit too, because when they play time of the possession battle and they have the ball for 40 minutes, Shedeur Sanders, he might be great, but if you're not giving him the chances to do it, you're not going to score. He's not going to score. I mean, they scored pretty frequently until that last drive. They were fine moving the ball and getting up and down the field. Kansas play keep away from them. But then on defense, they're really good at sacking the quarterback, forcing turnovers, and red zone touchdown percentage is insane. I don't know where it ranks nationally, but it's number 3 in the Big 12 at just over 51%. In terms of opponents scoring touchdowns against them. So when they're getting down there, they're not scoring touchdowns. The issue is that explosive passing plays, explosive rushing plays, yards per play, yards per pass attempt, yards per carry, passing efficiency, they're in the 14 or below. So they're allowing a lot of yards, big chunk plays, but then they're able to get away from those potentially being dangerous by getting interceptions and getting off the field on critical third down plays. Baylor, as we mentioned against Houston, didn't do that. They played an unclean football game, and they're not going to be able to do that against Kansas. And they're going to be able to move the ball. I mean, we mentioned that yesterday in the podcast to recap the Houston game, is you're going to be able to move the ball. This Kansas defense struggles, but they are opportunistic. You just can't let their defense be more opportunistic than your offense.
Right. You got to be able to hit those explosive plays. Like, if you're going to turn the ball over 2 times in this game, you got to be able to make that back by hitting explosive plays and actually scoring touchdowns on those drives when you do hit the explosive plays. And that was something that, kind of hurt Baylor against Houston was, you had a couple drives where you had explosive plays and then the drive stalled out. Can't really have that in this one against Kansas, because Kansas will take advantage of that. They'll hold the football, as we saw against Colorado. I have a feeling they're going to try to do the same thing. I got asked a question about this today, on my chat on the premium side for Sikkim 365, and it's like, I know we want to compare every game to the last game that was played or to the last few games that were played, but I think it's important to keep in mind the context of that game against Colorado, the fact that Colorado ran for 45 yards in that game. Baylor is not going to run for 45 yards. This is a totally different animal of a matchup. And so I think because of that, the game plans are going to be a little bit different. But I think in general, the reason why I say that is because Baylor hasn't been great with time of possession this year. But if you're able to run the football and keep Kansas's defense on the field for more plays than just, 3 plays and then you're off the field, you didn't even see a run play. You just 3 straight passes. You're kind of avoiding the wears and tears of a football game. And I don't believe Baylor will allow them to get off the field and just be able to, relax, right, with just a bunch of incompletions. Baylor's going to run the football. They've done it every single game. I know we talked about them going away from it against Houston. Well, they still ran the ball 47 times. So just to put that in perspective, they want to run the football. They will run the football. And I don't believe Kansas is going to stop them from running the football. I really don't. And so because of that, it changes some things. It changes some of the dynamics going into this game. But what it doesn't change is the simple fact that when they get into the red zone, which I do believe Baylor will get in the red zone quite a bit in this game, that's where everything changes, right? That's where you still have to be able to run the football. And can you run the football? That's where you got to be able to take care of the football. And can you take care of the football against a field that has shrunk? All of that's going to be very intriguing. I think Sora Robertson's legs are probably going to be something that Kansas may prepare for, but it's something that Baylor hasn't shown a lot of in recent weeks. And so I think that could be something that really helps them when they get into the red zone, getting those 4th and 1 conversions, getting those 3rd and 3 type conversions that can lead to scores. So that's going to be a very interesting thing. But you're right. I mean, Kansas's defense has playmakers, and that's really what it is. They're not the most stout unit. They're not going to wow you with the numbers. They're not going to wow you with the analytics, but they are going to wow you with specific players and guys who could be, NFL type players. And I think that's where you look at it and go, okay, you probably need to try to stay away from as many of those guys as possible for as much of this game as possible, attack other mismatches, run the football, establish line of scrimmage, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah. So Kansas is number 2 in the Big 12 with 11 interception. On the flip side, they've given up 20 passing touchdowns in Big 12 play, and that's the worst in the Big 12. So it literally epitomizes what they are defensively. They're going to get interceptions. They're going to give up passing touchdowns, and their passing efficiency, even with 11 interceptions, is still 14th defensively in the Big 12. So it's just like protect the football. Protect the football when you're driving into the red zone. I mean, if there's an opportunity for you to kick field goal, make sure you make your field goals. You don't want to have to settle for those. They're better on 4th down defense. The issue is teams don't go for it a ton on 4th downs. I don't think they have a ton of opportunities. So I think they convert enough 3rd downs and they create enough explosive plays. There's not a lot of 4th down opportunities. So that number's a little deceiving to me, but they're absolutely matter of fact that they're good in the red zone against preventing touchdowns. Maybe you just don't have to worry about getting into the red zone. Maybe you just score from outside of the red zone. The issue there becomes time of possession because you want to be able to run the football and possess the ball, keep it away from Kansas, and make them press. Because I think if you get up in this game and Kansas feels like they need to throw the football, that's not their strength. I mean, they have the ability to do it, but it's all predicated on running the football successfully. And if they're having to play catch up, that's not their strength. So it's really a fascinating matchup. You mentioned the Colorado game. That's just a different Colorado. Like they could not getting behind the way they did and the way that Kansas, that was worst case scenario for them. That was very similar in a lot of ways, even though Baylor wasn't running the ball as well against Colorado at that time. Baylor still rushed for 166 yards and controlled that game because of their running game. Once they got up, then you give up the Hail Mary late and they struggle. But Kansas executed that to a T, held the ball for 40 minutes, and Colorado just could never get it going. The best defense is a good offense. That's what Kansas did against Colorado. Adding on to that, I think special teams, the advantage for Baylor in special teams, I haven't seen it this spread in any game this season. Baylor clearly is the better special teams unit in every single area. Kickoff return offense, kickoff return defense, punt return offense. Baylor's top 5 in all categories. The only top 10, and it's number 10 for Kansas, is punt return offense. And that's number 10, 14, 16, 15 in all other categories. They do kick field goals better than Baylor. That is not saying a ton in terms of percentage, but they're still number 7 in field goal percentage. So it's not like they kick an exceptional rate. If it comes down to 1 or 2 plays where Baylor gets good field position, that could be the difference in this game. And, you don't want to put a lot of stock into that. But when it's that big of a gap across the board, that's really fascinating to me because you're worried about time of possession. You're worried about field position in a game where someone's going to run the ball a lot. Well, Kansas has not been very good in those areas, and that could be a reason that they struggled early in the season, and maybe they figured out more late in the season. But it's definitely something to watch because Baylor's been exceptional in those areas, whereas Kansas is not.
They have been, and I do think that, especially on the road, special teams can mean a lot. and it can really change a game. It can shift a game in one direction or another. So it does absolutely matter. And obviously Baylor's kicking game has gotten a little bit better over the last few weeks, and that certainly has helped some things, with Hankins being a little bit more reliable in that regard, especially in this last game. We'll see if that trend continues, or if it was just a one-off. That's going to be a big part of this. Palmer Williams has been great. I'm not sure how much we're going to see him in this game, to be honest. And then obviously in the return game, Josh Cameron has been incredible, and even Jamal Bell has shown moments like he did against Colorado. I do want to mention, the Colorado game, you mentioned it just a minute ago, and I think it's important to remember that Kansas didn't really stop Colorado. Like, I think Shedeur Sanders had 6 incompletions the entire game. He threw for 266 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Like, they did what they wanted in the pass game. And I'm sure the strategy for Kansas was to try to take away the pass game because they probably weren't that worried about Colorado's run game. But the thing of it was just Colorado's defense just could not get any stops. They just could not get off the field.
Which was impressive from Kansas' part because Colorado's been pretty good in that area.
It was. And it was by far their worst defensive performance that I think I've seen all year from Colorado, especially as you got later in the game. They couldn't get any stops. And it was kind of reminiscent. Baylor had moments in that game where it felt like they weren't going to get stopped at all either. They just couldn't finish the deal. And I think part of that, truthfully, is the pace that Baylor plays at. I think if Baylor had played a lot more not up tempo, they might have won that Colorado game. Also, if they made a field goal, they probably would have won that Colorado game.
Well, so that would have been the end of the game. Yeah, for sure.
So there's a couple things there that you look at and go, okay, well, Baylor really should have won that game in many, many ways. But part of the reason they didn't was because of the pace that they play at. And so I am curious going into this one. We've seen Baylor at times have a bunch of 3-and-outs. They can't have a bunch of 3-and-outs in this game. They go, we've seen it multiple times. We even saw it against West Virginia. You show up in the third quarter after putting on all these points and then 3 straight 3-and-outs. And West Virginia was unable to take advantage of that. But what happens when you possess the ball for a minute on 3 straight drives and Kansas has 2 12-minute drives? Then or 2 10-minute drives, whatever you want to call it, you're going to be in trouble. And so that's going to be another area that I'm looking at, because that's where Colorado struggled, was they just could never stay on the field long enough to really impact Kansas's defense at all and wear them down at all for them to be able to run the football. And then when they came off the field, Kansas was just wearing down the Colorado defense consistently. I am sure they're going to try to have that same approach. So Baylor's got to be able to find a way to play fast, but also recognize that you have to get first downs if you're going to play at that kind of speed.
Yeah. So in that game against Colorado, on the season, Colorado averages 8.5 yards per attempt passing. Against Kansas, it was 9.2. Completion percentage, Colorado's at 74% on the season. Against Kansas, it was 79%. Passing yards, here's the difference. 311 yards passing per game for Colorado is at 266. Complete or QB rating 165 for the season for Colorado. Against Kansas, it was 190. So they just didn't have the opportunities to go down there, and they had explosive plays, and then they couldn't punch it in late in the game to keep it close. But Travis Hunter, I think, had 2 long touchdowns in that game where they just got him the ball and Kansas couldn't tackle him, which that happens to people. It's Travis Hunter, but that's what Kansas has done all season. They just haven't been able to get guys on the ground defensively. They've made plays otherwise. So I'm really – it's an interesting game because I think both defenses struggle enough that you could say this is a limited possession game for both offenses because of the way they have the capability of playing both. I think Baylor has to come out and say, we're going to take away the run and make you beat us with the pass. That's going to speed the game up, and that favors Baylor to me. The issue is if you get in that and you load up the box, but you aren't able to you aren't able to limit him, then you're going to have issues.
Yeah, and that is absolutely right. I mean, if you're loading the box and you still can't get stops, I mean, they're going to be in trouble. And I think, that's one of those things where you look at an offense like Kansas and it's like, well, they're already hard enough to stop. So if you're saying, oh, we're going to take this away, I think they feel pretty good about attacking the other part of your defense. And so that's why, you come into this game, and we've talked a lot about Kansas's offense. And I just want to reiterate here that we know that there's a bunch of deficiencies in Kansas's defense. We know their offense is their headliner. I also want to say, Baylor's offense has been phenomenal. And Baylor's offense has the ability to really take advantage of what Kansas is lacking on the defensive side of the ball. And for as good as Kansas has, the schedule that Kansas has played, for as good as it is, that this might be the best offense that they faced during this time period. And I know people say, oh, that's crazy. Like, are they really better than Colorado? Well, let's just go through the numbers really quick. So since the month of October, which the first game in October was Iowa State, in which Baylor's offense still did not play to the level it has been playing at. But since that point, Baylor's 11th in yards per game. Baylor is 5th in yards per play, and Baylor's 8th in points per game since that Iowa State game. And that's not even really when the turnaround occurred. It was really the next week when they played Texas Tech. But in 2 months, you got 2 months of sample size. That's what they've been doing. They've been operating as a top 10 offense. And for as much credit as we want to give Colorado, for as much credit as we want to give BYU, a bunch of these teams, there's probably not an offense that's more equipped to go score a bunch of points on Kansas on their schedule than Baylor.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's because of the balance that they play with. And I think, Iowa State to an extent had that ability. They just haven't shown it consistently. And they also played a much slower pace. And it's not a spread offense. It matches up. I would say, honestly, matches up better with what Kansas tries to do and vice versa. They both familiar with similar type of offenses. Baylor running the spread offense, running with tempo, but also having the ability to slow it down. Baylor does it a lot of different things and has that ability to do a lot of different things. I'm with you. Like, it's kind of like pick your poison with what you want to do with Baylor right now if you're Kansas. And that's the predicament I would say all the teams but Houston have faced in this stretch. Tech, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, TCU is kind of what do we want to shut down? And it's the same predicament that Baylor's defense is going to be in against Kansas because they do have the ability to do both. I think Baylor just has to make the decision, say, we're going to try to stop your rush game and make you beat us otherwise. If you do that, if nothing else, you get them off the field a little bit quicker and give the ball back to your offense. And I think that's honestly probably what Kansas has done defensively is like, maybe we just take some risk and gamble. If not, we get the ball back and we possess the ball for 7 minutes and we go and score on you. They have the ability to do that. So I'm anxious to see, but we need to wrap this episode up. Any final thoughts on this just matchup with Baylor and obviously trying to get 8 wins for Baylor against Kansas, a team that hasn't beat them since, I don't know, was it 2008? I mean, it's been a while since it's happened, especially in Waco. I don't think Baylor's lost to Kansas in close to 15, 18 years.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. And obviously, this is a very different Kansas. And Baylor got lucky they didn't have to play Kansas last year because that likely would have been a loss. But yeah, I think in this matchup, it's just one of those things. It's senior night. It's a game where Baylor is feeling really good about themselves. And I think it's also important to mention the national media is really hyping up Kansas right now. And it's like, man, are they not realizing that Baylor's also 5-0 during this stretch? They've beaten a bunch of bowl teams, 3 bowl teams during this stretch. And they, over the last 5 games, have like a top 5 offense in the nation. Yeah. And everyone's just anticipating Kansas is just going to show up at McLean Stadium, beat Baylor, make it to a bowl game. Kansas is the team of destiny. Kansas is this team that might be the best team in the Big 12. And it's like, well, let's not forget that the team they're playing could also lay claim to that, especially if they beat Kansas. If Baylor beats Kansas, I think unequivocally, based on how they've played over the second half of the year, they're probably the second best team in the Big 12 because if Arizona State wins out, it's kind of hard to say they're better than Arizona State.
Right.
But I think you could say they're playing at a level that if they played Arizona State on a neutral site, there's a chance Baylor's favored in that game. So I think that's that's just important to mention. I think going into this matchup is that all the talks about Kansas, and it's like Baylor's been right there with them. I know the schedule hasn't been as tough, but they've been winning games very similarly and playing very, very well. And so I think people are kind of making the mistake of overlooking Baylor a little bit. And I anticipate the Bears to be very ready for this matchup against Kansas, especially on senior night.
Yeah. So currently Kansas is, or Baylor is a 1-point favorite. I think that I don't remember who I saw post this, but it might have been S&P Plus, Bill Connolly. Basically, Baylor's a 3-point favorite. If you just look at the analytics from the entire season, which was really kind of telling to me, even though the line's only 1. I'm anxious to see where the line goes throughout this week. If it moves, maybe it doesn't move at all until later.
It dropped. It was at 1.5. It dropped to 1 today.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's expected to be a close game. And I think it's mainly because you have two offenses that can score the football, that can do what they want. But yeah, we'll see. But all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. Thanks to each of you for listening. Have a great Tuesday and Sick 'em Bears.